Have you ever wondered what happens when engineers build a car so powerful it actually becomes dangerous to drive? Back in the muscle car era, automakers were locked in a horsepower war that produced some absolute monsters. Machines that could destroy their own tires, transmissions, and sometimes their drivers' confidence in a matter of seconds. Today we're counting down 10 muscle cars that were quite literally too fast for their own good. Cars that pushed beyond the limits of their technology, their tires, and often their owners' abilities. These weren't just fast cars. These were barely controlled explosions on wheels. So buckle up and hit that subscribe button, because this ride is about to get wild. Number 10. 1969. Chevrolet COPO Camaro 427. Picture this, it's 1969. You walk into a Chevrolet dealership looking for a Camaro SS. Nice car, right? But if you knew the right people and had the right connections, you could order something special. Something that wasn't in any brochure, something called a COPO Camaro. Central Office Production Order. That's what COPO stood for. It was supposed to be for fleet vehicles, cop cars and taxis. But some clever dealers figured out how to use it to order race engines in street cars. The result was absolutely insane. Under that innocent-looking hood sat a 427 cubic inch big block that Chevy claimed made 425 horsepower. Yeah, right. Everyone knew it was making way more than that. We're talking about a car that could run the quarter mile in under 13 seconds. In 1969. On bias ply tires, with drum brakes in the rear. Think about that for a second. Insurance companies lost their minds when they found out about these things. Here's why. The COPO Camaro looked just like a regular SS from the outside. No special badges, no racing stripes, nothing. To warn you that this thing could absolutely destroy a GTO or a 442 at a stoplight, dealers were selling them to kids who had no idea what they were getting into. One former owner told me his COPO would break the tires loose in third gear at 60 miles per hour just by stabbing the throttle. The car was literally too fast for its own chassis. The suspension couldn't handle the power, the brakes couldn't handle the speed. And the tires. Forget about it. Those skinny bias pliss would go up in smoke if you even looked at the accelerator wrong. Chevy only made about 1,000 of these monsters before someone realized they were basically selling barely legal race cars to the public. Today, a real COPO Camaro can sell for over $200,000. Not bad for a car that cost $3,500 new. But here's the thing. Most of the people who bought them had no idea they were buying a future legend. They just knew they were buying trouble. Number 9, 1970. Plymouth Hemi, CUDA. The Hemi, CUDA. Just saying the name. Makes car guys weak in the knees. But let me tell you something about this car that most people don't know. It was almost impossible to drive fast. Seriously, Plymouth dropped a 426 cubic inch Hemi engine into the CUDA for 1970. This thing made 490 pound-feet of torque. On paper, that sounds amazing. In reality, it was a nightmare. Here's what would happen. You'd line up at the drag strip, light turns green, you nail it. And nothing. Just tire smoke. Massive, endless clouds of tire smoke. The car wouldn't move forward. It would just sit there shredding rubber while some guy in a 340 Duster with half your horsepower would blow your doors off. The Hemi made so much torque so quickly that it would overpower everything. The tires, the suspension, even the driver. Professional drag racers had to completely rebuild these cars to make them work. We're talking about ladder bars, slicks, and completely reworked suspensions. Stock? Forget it. A former Plymouth engineer once admitted that they knew the car was almost undrivable when they released it, but they didn't care. It was about bragging rights. It was about having the biggest, baddest engine on the street, even if you couldn't actually use it. The Hemi CUDA had another problem too, weight distribution. That massive cast iron Hemi was so heavy it threw off the car's balance completely. In corners, the front end would push like a dump truck. On the highway, the rear end would get light and start floating around. And in the rain, you might as well park it. One owner famously said his CUDA tried to kill him every time he drove it. He wasn't joking. Only 652 Hemi Cudas were made in 1970. Most of them ended up wrapped around telephone poles or parted out when owners couldn't handle them. The survivors are worth over $3 million today. $3 million for a car that couldn't even hook up properly at the drag strip. Number 8, 1966. Shelby Cobra 427. Carroll Shelby was insane. There's no other way to explain the Cobra 427. He took a tiny British roadster that weighed 2,400 pounds and stuffed a 7-liter Ford racing engine into it. The result was a car with over 500 horsepower and absolutely no safety equipment whatsoever, no traction control, no stability management, no roll cage, not even proper seatbelts half the time. Professional race car drivers were terrified of this thing. Ken Miles, one of the best drivers of the era, called it a bloody handful. If Ken Miles thought it was difficult to drive, what chance did a regular person have? 0. That's what. The Cobra 427 would spin its wheels in every single gear. First, second, third, fourth, didn't matter. Hit the gas, and the rear end would step out. Always. The car had another charming habit. It would try to swap ends at high speed. You'd be cruising along at 80 or 90 miles per hour, everything seems fine. Then you'd hit a bump or a gust of wind would catch you, and suddenly you're going backwards. No warning, just instant terror. The chassis couldn't handle the power. Shelby basically took a car designed for a 4-cylinder engine and gave it 5 times the horsepower. The frame would actually twist under acceleration. Here's a fun fact. Insurance companies wouldn't even cover these things after a while. Too many claims, too many accidents, too many dead customers. Shelby only built about 350 street versions before production ended. Half of them were crashed within the first 5 years. The other half spent most of their time in garages because owners were too scared to drive them. One famous automotive journalist wrote that driving a Cobra 427 was like riding a rocket-powered shopping cart. He meant it as an insult. Shelby probably took it as a compliment. Today, an original 427 Cobra sells for over $2 million. $2 million for a death trap with wheels. But what a glorious death trap it was. Number 7. 1970 Buick GSX. Stage 1. Nobody talks about the Buick GSX anymore. That's a mistake because this thing was an absolute monster that Buick tried very hard to keep secret. See, Buick had an image problem in 1970. They were the old man's brand, the doctor's car, the conservative choice. So when they built the GSX Stage 1, they deliberately underrated the engine to avoid attention. They claimed it made 360 horsepower. Lies. Complete lies. When people actually put these things on dynos, they were making over 420 horsepower at the wheels. That means the engine was probably making close to 500 horsepower at the crank. From Buick, the company that sold cars to your grandfather. But here's where it gets really crazy. The torque. The Stage 1 made 510 pound-feet of torque. That was more than any other muscle car of the era. More than the Hemi. More than the LS6. More than anything. That torque would destroy transmissions. Literally. The Turbo 400 transmission couldn't handle it. Owners would go through 2 or 3 transmissions a year if they actually drove the car hard. The rear axle wasn't much better. The differential would grenade itself if you did too many burnouts. Which, let's be honest, was the whole point of owning one of these things. The frame couldn't handle it either. GSX Stage 1s would develop stress cracks in the chassis after a few thousand miles of hard driving, but the real problem was that nobody expected a Buick to be that fast. The GSX looked like a regular Skylark with some stripes and a hood scoop. Corvette owners would pull up next to one at a light, see the Buick badge, and figure they had an easy win. Wrong. Dead wrong. The GSX would absolutely humiliate a Corvette in a straight line. It would beat pretty much anything in a straight line. The problem was stopping, or turning, or doing anything other than going very fast in a perfectly straight line. Buick only made 678 GSX models. Even fewer got the Stage 1 package. Most of them were bought by people who had no idea what they were getting into. They just wanted a nice Buick with some sporty stripes. What they got was a transmission-eating, differential-destroying, Corvette-humiliating monster that their local mechanic had no idea how to fix. Number 6, 1969 Dodge Charger. Daytona NASA called Dodge in 1969. That's not a joke. NASA actually called Dodge to ask about the Charger Daytona's aerodynamics, because this thing was basically a rocket with wheels. Dodge needed to win in NASCAR. They were getting destroyed by Ford's aerodynamic Torino Talladega, so they did something completely insane. They took a regular Charger and added a massive nose cone and a huge rear wing. The wing was so tall you could open the trunk without hitting it. The result was the first car to break 200 miles per hour in NASCAR. 200 miles per hour. In 1969. But here's the thing. They had to sell street versions to make it legal for racing. So they built about 500 street legal Daytonas. Street legal. With that massive wing. And that ridiculous nose. And an engine that could push this thing way past any speed limit in America. Way, way past. Owners quickly discovered a problem. The car was too fast for its own good. Literally. The speedometer only went to 150. The tires were only rated for 120. The brakes were designed for a car that might hit 100 on a good day, but the Daytona could easily do 140 on the highway without even trying. It was aerodynamically capable of going even faster. Much faster. NASCAR banned it after one season. Too fast, too dangerous, too dominant. They literally changed the rules to stop this car from racing. Think about that. A sanctioning body designed to promote speed said this car was too fast. On the street, it was even worse. The nose cone made parking impossible. The wing made it a cop magnet. And the performance made it a death trap in inexperienced hands. Dodge dealers couldn't sell them. They sat on lots for months. Some dealers actually removed the nose and wing to sell them as regular Chargers. Today, those dealers are probably crying. Because an original unmodified Charger Daytona can sell for over $900,000. $900,000 for a car that was too fast for NASCAR and too weird for the street. Number 5, 1970 Chevrolet Chevelle SS 454 LS6. The LS6 was a lie. Everything about it was a lie. Chevrolet claimed it made 450 horsepower. Independent testing showed it was making close to 500. They claimed it was just another big block option. It was actually a hand-built racing engine that somehow ended up in a street car. They claimed it was emissions legal. Well, let's just say the EPA might have disagreed if they'd looked too closely. This was the most powerful engine Chevrolet ever put in a production car. Ever. Including today. Think about that. In 1970, with no computers, no fuel injection, no modern technology, Chevrolet built an engine so powerful they've never topped it. The LS6 was originally designed for Can-Am racing, unlimited class road racing, the kind where there were basically no rules except don't die. Somehow, someone at Chevrolet decided to put this engine in a Chevelle. The result was catastrophic for everything except straight line speed. The Chevelle's chassis was designed for grocery shopping and Sunday drives, not 500 horsepower. The frame would flex under hard acceleration. The body panels would actually wrinkle from the torque. The rear bumper would sag from the force of launches. Owners reported that their Chevelles would literally tear themselves apart if driven hard. Door gaps would change, the hood wouldn't close properly, the trunk would develop stress cracks. The suspension was a joke. It was the same setup used on the 6-cylinder base model, except now it was trying to control twice the weight and 5 times the power. In corners, the car would lean like a sailboat. Under braking, the nose would dive so hard the front bumper would almost scrape the ground. Under acceleration, the rear would squat like a dog doing its business. But in a straight line, nothing could touch it. Magazine tests from 1970 show the LS6 Chevelle running the quarter mile in 13.1 seconds, bone stock, on terrible tires. With a terrible driver, a good driver with good tires could get into the 12s. That's faster than most modern performance cars. Chevrolet only built about 4,000 LS6 Chevelle. Half of them were automatic, which couldn't handle the power and would overheat in traffic. The other half were 4-speeds that would destroy their clutches every few thousand miles. But man, what a way to destroy a clutch. Number 4. 1968 AMC AMX 390 AMC, American Motors Corporation. The company that brought you the Gremlin and the Pacer. Not exactly known for performance, right? Wrong. Dead wrong. In 1968, they built something called the AMX, and it was completely unhinged. The AMX was tiny, shorter than a Corvette, only 2 seats, but AMC stuffed a 390 cubic inch V8 under the hood in a car that weighed less than 3,200 pounds. The result was problematic. The short wheelbase made it twitchy. Really twitchy. Like sneeze and you're in a ditch twitchy. The massive torque from that 390 engine would overwhelm the rear tires instantly, but because the wheelbase was so short, the rear would come around fast. Really fast. Before you knew what was happening, you'd be looking at where you came from. AMC's own test drivers crashed several prototypes during development. That should have been a warning. But AMC was desperate. They needed something to compete with the Corvette and the Mustang. They needed something exciting. Something that would make people forget about the Rambler, so they released the AMX 390 anyway, and it was fast. Crazy fast. It would run the quarter mile in the low 14 stock. With a few modifications, it could get into the 12s. But it was the handling that really made it special. And by special, I mean terrifying. Craig Breedlove, the land speed record holder, was hired to promote the AMX. Even he said it was a handful. This is a guy who drove rocket cars for a living, and he thought the AMX was sketchy. The car had another problem: build quality. AMC didn't have the money or expertise to build a proper performance car, so they just took a regular car and made it go fast. The result was interesting. The doors wouldn't close properly after a few hard launches, the dashboard would crack from vibration, the exhaust would fall off, the transmission would overheat, the differential would whine, the engine would overheat, everything would overheat. AMC only sold about 6,000 AMXs over 3 years. Most people bought them thinking they were getting a budget Corvette. What they got was a barely controlled missile that wanted to kill them. But hey, at least it was fast. Really, really fast. Too fast for its own good, too fast for AMC's engineers, and definitely too fast for most of its owners. Number 3, 1971, Pontiac Firebird. Trans Am 455 HO. 1971 was supposed to be the year performance died. Lower compression ratios, stricter emissions, the end of the muscle car era. Pontiac didn't get the memo. Or maybe they did and just decided to ignore it, because the 455 HO Trans Am was absolutely brutal. At a time when everyone else was detuning engines, Pontiac was building one of the most savage motors ever put in a car. The 455 HO made 480 pound-feet of torque. But here's the thing, it made it at 2,700 RPM, that's basically idle. You could be cruising along in third gear, barely touching the gas, and this thing had enough torque to break the tires loose. The mid-range punch was so violent it would actually scare passengers. I'm not exaggerating. People would refuse to ride in these cars twice. The Trans Am's chassis wasn't ready for this kind of power. Pontiac had improved the suspension over the regular Firebird, sure. But it was still a compromise. The car was supposed to be a grand tourer, something you could drive across the country in comfort. But with the 455 HO, it became a wild animal. The torque would overwhelm everything. The tires would break loose without warning. The limited slip, differential would bang and clunk. The transmission would hunt for gears. The braking system was even worse. Pontiac used the same brakes as the base model Firebird. Front discs, rear drums. Fine for a car with 200 horsepower. Not fine for a car with almost twice that. And the torque meant you were always going faster than you thought. You'd nail the throttle, the car would lunge forward, and suddenly you'd be doing 90. The brakes couldn't handle it. They'd fade after 2 or 3 hard stops, sometimes after just 1. But the real problem was the tires. Pontiac fitted the Trans Am with F60 15s. They looked cool, wide whites with raised letters, but they were completely overwhelmed by the 455's torque. In the dry, they'd spin. In the wet, they were useless. In the cold, you might as well park it. One magazine tester wrote that the 455 Trans Am was like trying to control an avalanche. He meant it as criticism. Pontiac's engineers probably high-fived each other. Only 1,800 were built. Most of them ended up crashed, blown up, or parted out. The survivors are worth over $200,000 today. But I bet their current owners don't drive them much. Too scary. Number 2, 1969. Ford Torino. Talladega Ford was losing. Bad. On NASCAR's super speedways, the aerodynamic Dodge Charger 500 was destroying everything Ford had, so Ford did what Ford always did. They went completely overboard. The Torino Talladega was Ford's nuclear option. They took a regular Torino and completely reworked the front end, extended the nose, flushed the grille, rolled the rockers. The result was slippery. Really slippery, like 200 miles per hour slippery. But Ford had to sell 500 street versions to make it legal for NASCAR, so they built 750 with a 428 Cobra jet engine on the street, with no special training required to buy one. This was a recipe for disaster. The Talladega was too fast for its own good, literally. The aerodynamics that made it great on the track made it terrifying on the street. At highway speeds, the front end would get light. Really light, like steering becomes a suggestion light. The car was designed to run at 180 miles per hour on a banked track. At 70 on a flat highway, it didn't know what to do with itself. The nose would hunt, the rear would float, crosswinds would push it around like a sail. And if you actually went fast, like really fast, the car would try to take off. I'm not joking. The aerodynamics created lift at high speed. Ford's own engineers admitted later that they never tested it above 140. They were afraid of what might happen. The Cobra jet engine didn't help. It made so much power so suddenly that the rear tires couldn't cope. But unlike other muscle cars that would just spin and smoke, the Talladega would get sideways. Fast. The long nose and aerodynamic body meant the rear would come around quicker than you could correct it. Professional drivers loved it. Regular people, they were terrified. Dealers couldn't sell them. They looked weird with that extended nose. They were expensive, and word got out quickly that they were dangerous. Most Talladegas sat on dealer lots for months. Some were converted back to regular Torinos just to move them. Today, an original Talladega is worth over $150,000, but here's a fun fact: many current owners trailer them to shows. They're too scared to drive them. A car so fast that people are still afraid of it 50 years later, that's the definition of too fast for its own good. Number 1, 1987. Buick GNX. The GNX shouldn't exist. By 1987, the muscle car was dead, killed by emissions, safety regulations, and fuel economy standards. Everything was fuel injected, everything had catalytic converters, performance was measured in tenths of a second, not full seconds. Then Buick built this thing, and it destroyed everything, including Buick's own relationship with the Corvette team. The GNX was a Grand National that Buick sent to ASC McLaren for modifications. Bigger turbo, better intercooler, suspension work. The result was a car that made 276 horsepower. Officially. Everyone knew it was making way more. How much more? Try 350, maybe 375. From a 3.8-liter V6 with a turbocharger the size of a dinner plate, but it was the torque that really made the GNX special. 360 pound-feet at 2,000 RPM, with turbo lag that would snap your neck when it finally hit. The power delivery was like nothing else on the road. Nothing. 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 Everything. It was violent. It was savage. It was completely inappropriate for a Buick. In testing, the GNX ran the quarter mile in 12.7 seconds. Faster than a Corvette, faster than a Ferrari Testarossa, faster than anything else you could buy in America in 1987, from Buick. The old man's car company. GM's executives were not happy. The Corvette was supposed to be the flagship, the halo car, the fastest thing GM made. And here was this Buick, this turbocharged V6 Buick, absolutely destroying it. The story goes that Corvette engineers actually complained to management. They wanted the GNX killed. Or at least detuned. Management compromised. They limited production to 547 units, and they made sure everyone knew this was a one-time thing. Never again would Buick be allowed to embarrass the Corvette. But the GNX had a problem. It was too fast for 1987 technology. The tires couldn't handle the torque. The transmission wasn't designed for that kind of power. The brakes were from a regular Regal. The frame would flex under hard acceleration. The turbo would overheat in traffic. The Intercooler would heat soak after a few runs. It was a 1960s muscle car idea with 1980s technology, and it didn't quite work. Most GNX owners babied them. They knew what they had. Something special. Something that would never happen again. A car that was too fast for its own good, too fast for GM's politics, too fast for the technology of the time, and definitely too fast for a Buick. Today, a low-mileage GNX sells for over $200,000. $200,000 for a Buick Regal with a turbo. But what a turbo it was. And there you have it, 10 muscle cars that were literally too fast for their own good. Cars that pushed beyond what their tires, transmissions, and chassis could handle. Cars that were banned from racing, rejected by insurance companies, and feared by their own drivers. Which one of these would you be brave enough to drive? Or better yet, which one would you be crazy enough to own? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories about cars that probably shouldn't have existed, but thank God they did. Hit that notification bell too, and we'll see you next time with more automotive insanity.